Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today we are going to start a new topic chapter of prostate cancer, and I will be presenting the first topic of this screening in the prostate cancer. What the consensus about it? I am Dr. Shamal Muswa, resident urology, and my moderator Dr. Adnan. So what are the learning objectives of today's session? What is screening? History of screening in prostate cancer, tools for screening, controversy on screening in prostate cancer, current consensus, and the bottom line. So basically, starting with what is the screening, the examination of a group of people to separate well person from those who have an undiagnosed pathological condition or who are at high risk. Benefits of diagnosis at early stage of the disease to increase better survival and reduce morbidity. The aim of screening is that it detects disease in early asymptomatic stage, it gives early intervention and management, reduces the risk of disease that has already occurred, and reduction in mortality from cancer. Now moving on the type of screening, number one is a population or mass screening. Mass screening is defined as examination of the asymptomatic man. It usually takes place as a part of trial or study and is initiated by the screener. While the second one is opportunistic screening, it comprises of individual case findings which are initiated by the person being screened patient or his physician. History of prostate cancer screening. In early 60s and 70s, many researchers were searching for the tumor-specific antigen that helps to target for immunotherapy of the cancer. While the earlier report on the properties of the antigen in the prostate was the American urologist Reuben Flocks in 1960s. He suggested that the immunoassay that could be used for blood testing and perform early studies exploring the potential clinical uses of PSA as a biomarker in prostatic diseases. Ultimately, then Mr. Ching Yu and Roswell Park, the patient for discovery of purified human prostate antigen in 1984 made, and what emerged from the study that PSA was clinically useful for monitoring the course of patient already known to have the prostate cancer. While however, because there was overlap of serum levels because of prostate cancer, benign prostate hyperplasia and prostatitis, PSA level were sometimes normal or in low in patient with prostate cancer. So it was not believed that the PSA could be used as a first-line screening test for prostate cancer. And in the early 90s, it was first demonstrated that the PSA blood test could be used as a first-line screening tool for the prostate cancer by the FDA. While the PSA derivatives like PSA velocity, PSA density, and the free total PSA ratio, also approved by the FDA, serve to improve the accuracy of the PSA testing. Now, what are the tools for screening? Number one is the PSA, prostate specific antigen. Second one is the DRE, and third one is the biopsy. Now we will discuss them one by one. Number one is the PSA. PSA is basically a protein secreted in high concentration in the semen fluid. It is influenced by the androgen and found in unbound and unbound forms. Its level in blood can vary due to age, prostate volume, and race. It is a current available test that we have, and it is especially not a disease specific but an organ specific. The PSA test is responsible for significant increase in incidence and detection of early stage prostate cancers. PSA testing reduce prostate cancer specific mortality, and it help out to follow the course of treatment and disease follow-up. There are some factors that typically produce a substantial or sustained rise in the PSA. Some of them are the benign prostate hyperplasia, prostatitis, urinary tract infections, and the prostate biopsies or surgery. Factors that sometimes produce a small or temporary rise in the PSA are ejaculation, a doctor's digital rectal examination, Foley's, catheter and cystoscopy, vigorous bike riding, warm climates, bypass surgery, and random some unexplained variation. There's a reference age according to the PSA. For example, if the patient is 40 to 49 age group, its PSA normal would be 0 to 2.5 nanogram per milliliter, while in the 50s to 59, 0 to 3.5, 60, 69, 0 to 4.5, and 70 to 79, 0 to 6.5. While regarding the prostate cancer risk at low PSA levels 0.5 or less, the patient would have a risk of 6.6%. If it is 1.1 into 2, then it could be 17%. PSA, if it is in the range of 2.1 into 3.0, then the prevalence of the prostate cancer would be 23.9. And if the PSA is 3.1 into 4.0 range, then it would be prostate cancer risk will be 26.9%.
So I think these two slides are more important than what we are actually practicing these days. And it was something which came about in the last few years, maybe 2 or 3 years. Earlier, it was something in our minds and in our reports also that the normal range of PSA is 0 to 4 nanogram per ml. But in those reports, it was not mentioned what's the age of the patient. So perhaps if we see patients who are 45 years plus or 50 years plus, we are actually missing something between 2.5 and 4. And this group, if you go to the next slide, it gives you like maybe 25% incidence or prevalence of the disease. So it is important to have something which makes you understand that there is some problem with the patient. There is a problem which is more than what lower urinary tract symptoms are, and that impression will only be say reflected when you do DRE. So your finger examination plus the report plus the imaging, which is ultrasound, all these three things combined can give you something which is a positive sense towards ascertaining whether the patient is benign or malignant. You see, this figure which is like 2.1 to 3.0. It is like greater than 23%. So this is a very big figure. So we have to change our practice. We have to change our thinking process.
You are very right, sir. Previously, when we used to see the results of PSA testing from different labs, even from our lab, so only a figure was mentioned. Now, recently, if you have seen over the past 2 to 3 years, the trend has been changed. Some good labs are even mentioning the range with the patient, and the patient of the age of the patient is also labeled, and on the side they are referring to the age in the previous slide. This is the range where your patient stands and how the clinician should be interpret their result. So obviously the practice is evolving over the passage of time.
Now there are some other factors of the PSA along with it. One of them is PSA density. So the prostate specific antigen density is a level of serum PSA divided by the prostate volume. The higher the PSA density, the more likely it is that the prostatic carcinoma is clinically significant. PSA velocity and doubling time. There are two methods of measuring PSA kinetics. Number one is the PSA velocity. It is the absolute annual increase in serum PSA level, that is nanogram per ml per year, and PSA doubling time, which measures the exponential increase in serum PSA over the passage of time.
Can you please explain PSA doubling time? I'm not able to understand with this definition.
According to the latest that we have the literature over it, PSA doubling time is that normal. For example, if the patient having the PSA which is less than 0.12 and per exponential rise is 0.12, and if we double it, that is 0.24. So if the potential rise of the PSA is increasing according to that, because if it is less than 0.12, it is okay within the normal limit. If it is riding with 0.12 per year and 0.12 in the third year and 0.12 in the fourth year, so it means that is increasing by the passage of age of time and the time. But if it not increasing with the same range and it is increasing in 1, 2 or 3 nanogram per year, it will be doubling. So when it is double, then it is written density. Look, the more the it is likely the density of the, and it is very clinically significant then. But if it increasing with the passage of time, that is a normal range, then it's okay. We have to only follow the patient.
I think another way of explaining this is with age, the absolute value of PSA increases, and
Yes.
that's a normal thing. But if somebody is less than 49 years of age, and if there is a value which is like 1 nanogram per ml, if you double that value within 6 months, then the doubling time is quite narrow. But if it doubles in, say, 5 years' time, this can be acceptable. So doubling time is nothing but it is actually the increment in the absolute value of PSA per unit time, or whatever the time may be. So if it doubles within 3 months or 6 months, then you have the velocity is too much. It's against your definition of velocity. So you have to look into the matter why it has done so. So that's the explanation.
In the patient is known case of CA prostate, and if it comes with like biochemical recurrence or something else, so for that we use these terms.
The other one is a free or total PSA ratio. Free or total PSA ratio must be used cautiously because it may be adversely affected by the several pre-analytical and clinical factors like instability of the PSA at 4 degrees Celsius and room temperature, variable assay characteristics, and concomitant BPH in large prostate. And it is studied that the prostate cancer was detected in men with a PSA within the range of 4 into 10 nanogram per ml by biopsy, and 56% of men with free total PSA ratio less than 0.10, but in only 8% with a free total PSA ratio greater than 0.25 nanogram per ml. While a systemic review including 14 studies found a pooled sensitivity of 70% men in with a PSA of 4 into 10 nanogram per ml. While PSO free total PSA is of no clinical use if the total serum PSA is greater than 10 nanogram per ml or during follow-up of the known already patient of having the prostatic carcinoma. So according to the EUA guidelines 2020, whom PSA should be performed. So in the recommendation, the first one is do not subject to men to prostate specific antigen testing without counseling them on the potential risk and benefits. So that is a strong strength rating. Offer an individual risk adaptive strategy for early detection to well informed men and life expectancy of at least 10 to 15 years. While offer early PSA testing to well informed men at an elevated risk of having prostatic carcinoma, like men having age greater than 50 years of age, men greater than 45 years of age and a family history of prostatic carcinoma, men of African descent of 45 years of age greater than, and men carrying BRCA mutation to greater than 40 years of age. While the last one is a stop early diagnosis of prostatic carcinoma based on life expectancy and perform status. Men who have a life expectancy of less than 15 years are unlikely to benefit. So this one is a strong recommendation. Now moving on to second part of our tool of screening, which is digital rectal examination. Most prostatic carcinomas are located, as we know, in the peripheral zone and may be detected by the DRE. In studies, 18% of the cases, prostatic carcinoma is detected by suspected DRE alone or irrespective of the prostatic PSA levels. A suspected DRE in patient with a PSA level less than 2 nanogram per ml has a positive predictive value of 50 to 30%. An abnormal DRE is associated with an increase of a higher IUCP grade and is indication of biopsy. Now, what are the guidelines regarding the DRE of the patient whom we should perform? So the first one is the US Preventive Services Task Force. According to them, the use of digital rectal examination as a screening modality is not recommended because there is a lack of evidence on the benefits. According to the American Academy of Family Physicians, it states that the digital rectal examination does not improve detection of prostate cancer and should not be performed as a part of screening. The third one is American Urology Association AUA. According to them in 2013, the guideline panel could find no evidence to support the continued use of DRE as a first line method of screening. So there are different guidelines regarding the DRE.
A
Now,
word about DRE. You see, this is something which needs a lot of practice. For instance, what was the impression in the days when I was actually at your age? Uh, After having put your finger into the rectum for 50 cases, palpating the prostate, you will become educated enough to actually state what's the kind of prostate that you are dealing with. So it needs a lot of practice. Yes, it differs from person to person. Sometimes a person is having a very sensitive finger. Now you see, your finger is within the glove. So whenever you want to palpate, there has to be something at the back of your mind, what you are actually palpating. So what we palpate is actually called consistency. Then we roll our fingers, meaning to say we want to rule out whether the mucosa is actually mobile or is it tethered. Sometimes we want to see the face of the patient. As such, it has to be seen every time because we want to know whether this is a tender prostate or it is a non-tender prostate. So whenever somebody is asking you about the value of DRE, then it should be, I think, according to the culture and society and the conditions in which you are practicing. We can read a lot about Europe and America. We can have our own judgments about their own guidelines.
yes, sir.
But you see, whenever we are practicing, then we should practice and make ourselves conversant with whatever things that are available. So first, our fingers have to be very sensitive, and you make them practice. This is something which is lost in the last few years. Now everybody is actually looking at the ultrasound picture or the PSA value. Nobody wants to put the finger in. You see, as I've said earlier on, for all purposes, it's not the screening tool. Yes, we accept it, but combining finger examination with PSA
sir.
value and the ultrasound, these three things will give you a lot of benefit. Rather than minus one thing, will not actually give you an edge when you are practicing, for instance, in an area in our country, and this is a fact, where many things are not available. So, for instance, if a person is living in a rural area and if there is no ultrasound available, which is a transrectal ultrasound, and there is no PSA available, then you have to be equally, I think, proficient to diagnose something called maybe cancer. So if you are a doctor in a rural area, at least your finger is with you. And if you have practiced your finger, you can judge whether this patient is a benign patient or this patient might be, question mark, a cancer patient. Then this patient can be referred to a tertiary care center in a city. So you see, you have to train yourself according to the condition in which you are, rather than practicing or mimicking something which is not ours. So American conditions are not our conditions. Our condition is our condition, and that is the fact. So we have to follow our own. We don't have the guidelines of our own, but we have to follow our own, intuition. So this is our intuition. What do you say?
So you are very right. Basically, during a part of being a urologist and going through the training, it is very important that you should train ourselves for first the clinical examination. Previously, some of the grid supervisors used to say that if you are not putting your finger in, then you are putting your foot in. So that was the value of digital rectal examination previously. So with over the passage of time, with the advent of transrectal ultrasound, I think the value of DREs has been decreasing over the passage of time. But it shouldn't be like this. Of course, even for the senior clinicians and most importantly for those residents who are learning through their part of training, should perform DRE. As you have said, 50 DREs, then you will be substantially able to diagnose whether there is a benign consistency or there is something that a nodule or a harder consistency that may lead to a malignancy diagnosis.
Yes, sir. And as we have been progressing with time, the things are changing too fast. We should not shy away from technology. I'm not for anything against technology. I'm pro technology, but I don't want to surrender all my sensibilities as a doctor. So, I means the whole community in which I am actually residing, and that is you. So, if somebody tells me to not to touch the patient, if somebody tells me not to put my finger on the wrist just to know the pulse rate, if somebody tells me that you should not talk to the patient because now your examination is moving towards virtual patient, things will change drastically for the times to come. But if this thing is missed from our training process, then we will be at a loss because we are not those countries where the technology is being produced. We will always be at the mercy of somebody else. So you have to have your own faculties with you. Faculties means your own sensibilities, five senses. You must use your mind, you must use your eyes, you must use your fingers as well as your palm, because that will give you at least a diagnosis. Maybe not the proper diagnosis, maybe a differential diagnosis. So please don't surrender your sensibilities. Otherwise, this technology is not ours. Actually, it will go away sometime because we are not producing it. So if we progress to a stage when we will be able to develop our own technologies and we are the manufacturers, then I think the society will have the opportunity of turning itself and saying that yes, now we don't want to see the patient. There might be a robot who can see the patient. There might be another tool that can see the patient and tell me what the patient is. I will only judge, and I'm just a judge. I won't collect the evidence. I will only see the evidence. So that time will come, but I think this is not the way to train ourselves. We should train ourselves with the finger first, and then things later. Actually, this is what the fact is.
Yes, sir.
But you see, we have to learn both the things, technology as well as our own hands and eyes.
Thank you, sir. Now the third one is a trust guided biopsy. Now regarding biopsy, the need for prostate biopsy is based on PSA level or suspicious DRE or imaging that we have. Age, potential, comorbidity and therapeutic consensus should also be considered and discussed beforehand. Risk stratification is a potential tool for reducing unnecessary biopsies. Limited PSA elevation alone should not prompt immediate biopsy. Prostate specific antigen level should be verified after few weeks in the same laboratory using the same assay under the standardized condition, like for example no ejaculation, manipulations and the urinary tract infections. While ultrasound guided biopsy is now the standard of care. Prostate biopsy is performed either by the transrectal or transperineal approach. Cancer detection rates when performed without prior imaging with MRI are comparable between the two approaches. However, some evidence suggests reduced infection risk with the transperineal route. Now, what is the prostate biopsy procedure and how many of the sampling sites and number of cores that we take during the biopsy? On baseline biopsies, where no prior imaging with MPMRI is multiparametric MRI that we discuss in the further slides has been performed, or where multiparametric MRI has not shown any suspicious lesion, the sample sites should be then bilateral from apex to base as far as posterior and lateral as possible in the peripheral gland. Additional cores should be obtained from suspected areas identified by the DRE. Suspect areas on trust might be consideration for the additional biopsies. At least 8 systemic biopsies are recommended in the prostate with the size of about 30 cc. Now 10 to 12 core of the biopsies are recommended in large prostate with greater than 12 cores not being significantly more conclusive. where multiparametric MRI has shown a suspicious lesion, then can be obtained through cognitive guidance, ultrasound, MRI fusion software, or indirect or direct in-bore guidance. Current literature does not show a clear superiority of one technique over the another. A minimum of 3 cores are taken from each of the lesion. Now, what should be a recommended terminology for reporting the prostate biopsy?
Just a word about target biopsy, fusion biopsy, and a systematic biopsy. You see, but these three things were having not only historical importance, but also they have got their own yields in terms of percentages. For instance, earlier, the first thing that came on to the scene was prostate biopsy, and that was 12 core, 6 core, 8 core, 12 core, and then saturation biopsies. And these biopsies were actually done through the transrectal route under transrectal ultrasound guidance. Now the second comes in with the transperineal, but again the imaging was transrectal, so it was transrectal guided perineal biopsy. But again, you take a lot of samples, maybe 12, 25, maybe 35. What these things were missing was actually the signal which was picked up on a multiparametric MRI, and that's an abnormal signal. So the things move on to MP-MRI guided biopsy, and that becomes fusion, cognitive fusion or non-cognitive fusion that comes on later. But now the world has moved towards another phase, and this is something which is missed in your presentation. With target biopsy and fusion biopsy, we were missing a lot. We were missing something where it is not hyperechoic, it is not hypoechoic, maybe it is isoechoic, and it is not giving any abnormal echogenic signal, and you are missing that point. So now what the world is moving is you do first MP-MRI guided biopsy, combine it with systematic biopsy, maybe 6 or 8 random samples of the prostate. So combining these two gives you close to 97% yield in terms of prostate hitting a positive focus. So now this is something which comes on very, very recently. We have to combine both the things.
Now, if you have performed the prostate biopsies, what should be the recommended terminology for that? So, according to the guidelines, that benign negative for malignancy, if appropriate, include a description. And what about description is active inflammation. Either it is containing the granulomatous inflammation, high-grade prostatic intraepithelial neoplasia, high-grade prostatic intraepithelial neoplasia with atypical glands or suspicious for adenocarcinoma. Focus of atypical glands, lesion for adenocarcinoma, atypical small SNR proliferation or suspicious for cancer, adenocarcinoma and interductal carcinoma. Interpretation of histopathology. A biopsy can be considered significant if it is contain the glandular tissue, but if a prostate biopsy does not contain any glandular tissue, should be reported as a diagnostically inadequate. Mandatory elements that to be reported for a carcinoma prostate positive biopsies are type of carcinoma, either the primary or secondary with Gleason grade, percentage of the high grade carcinoma, extent of carcinoma in millimeter or percentage, if present, then seminal vertical invasion, intraductal carcinoma, cribriform pattern, and perineal invasion, and ISUP grade. Guidelines for the negative biopsy. For example, that if a biopsy does not contain any glandular tissue, so what are the guidelines for the negative biopsies are: perform multiparametric MRI before the prostate biopsy, which is a strong indication. And the third one is when a multiparametric MRI is negative and clinical suspicion of a prostate cancer is high, perform systemic biopsy based on the shared decision making with the patient.
Yes, and this is something which I was telling. It is an improvement on this third sentence, which this sentence says that if MP-MRI is negative, then you go towards systematic. What I am saying is, if it is positive, again you have to go to the systematic. Combining these two will be the strongest evidence.
Now, what are the indication for the repeat biopsy? The indication for repeat biopsies are rising or persistently elevated PSA, suspicious DRE, atypical small SNR proliferation, atypical gland suspicious for cancer, extensive high-grade prostatic intraepithelial neoplasia. A few atypical glands immediately adjacent to high-grade prostatic intraepithelial neoplasia, intraductal carcinoma as a solitary finding, greater than 90% risk of associated high-grade prostatic carcinoma, and positive multiparametric MRI findings. Now, percentages of the complication per TRUST biopsy session are: number one is a hematospermia, which is 37.4%, hematuria greater than 1 day, which is 14.5, rectal bleeding less than 2 days, 2.2, and prostatitis with 1.0%. Fever that could be greater than 38.5 degrees Celsius with a percentage of 0.8, epididymitis, rectal bleeding greater than days 2, urinary retention, and other complication requiring hospitalization. So these are the complications regarding the TRUST biopsy. Now, characteristics of screening. If we just see this slide, the tools that we have discussed about the DRE, TRUST, and prostatic specific antigen. The DRE sensitivity is 45 to 58%, specificity is 96 to 97%, while the positive productive value is only 24 to 58 of the percent. If we move on to TRUST, which is sensitivity is 71 to 91%, specificity is 89 to 94%, and positive productive value is 15 to 43%. PSA greater than 4 nanogram per ml is having sensitivity of 67 to 89%, specificity 59 to 97%, and positive productive value of 33 into 47%.
So even if you are not screening your population or your patients who are coming to you, if you combine all three that we are actually doing
Yes, sir.
consciously or unconsciously, then we are moving on to have a greater positive predictive values. So this is my plea that please don't consider them separately. Always make the judgment after you have gone through all three things,
Three of them.
right? So don't just give a statement to the patient that the DRE is abnormal, so you must have got something called cancer. Don't say that unless and until you combine all three things.
Now, there are other adjacent markers and tests that we have. Alternative test: prostatic carcinoma antigen 3, the prostatic health index, and the 4K score. And on the clinical diagnosis, for T staging, we have TRUST, multiparametric MRI. For the nodal staging, we have computed tomography, CT, and magnetic resonance imaging, choline, PET, and CT, with the prostate-specific membrane antigen-based PET and CT. For the metastatic staging, we have the bone scan, fluoride, PET, and PET CT, along with the choline, PET CT, and MRI, and the prostate-specific membrane antigen-based PET and CT. Now we will discussing them one by one. For the serum test that we have the prostate health index, which is combining free and total prostate-specific antigen and the two pro-isoforms of the PSA. The 4-Calicurin 4K score test, which is measuring the free, intact, and total PSA and Calicurin-like peptidase 2HK in addition to age, DRE, and prior biopsy status. With the urine test that we have the prostate carcinomatous antigen gene 3, PCA3 is a prostate-specific non-coding microRNA biomarker that is detectable in the urine sediments obtained after the 3-stroke of the prostatic massage during the DRE. The commercially available Prognosa urine test for PCA is superior to total and free PSA for the detection of prostatic carcinoma in men with elevated PSA. PCA3 scores increases with the prostate volume, but there are conflicting data about whether it is independently predict the ISB grade or not. So there are studying going on about this PCA3 markers. The other tests that we have are the SELECT MDX test is based on the messenger RNA biomarker isolation from the urine. The presence of the HOXC6 and DLX1 mRNA mRNA levels is assessed to provide an estimate of the risk of both presence of prostatic carcinoma on biopsy as well as the presence of high risk cancer. While other is the Tempress 2 ERG effusion. It is a effusion of the transmembrane proteins serine 2 and the ERG gene that can be detected in 50% of the prostatic carcinoma. Now the important point is when detection of the Tempress ERG in urine was added to prostatic carcinoma gene 3 expression and serum PSA prostate score, the cancer prediction improved. Now regarding the TRUS, the transrectal ultrasound and the ultrasound based techniques, grayscale transrectal ultrasound is not reliable at detecting the prostatic carcinoma alone, and the diagnostic yield of additional biopsy performed on hypoechoic lesions is negligible. Now the new modalities that we have in research and literature is the new sonographic modalities like sonoelastography, contrast enhanced ultrasound or high resolution micro ultrasound that have given the promising preliminary findings either alone or combined in the so-called multiparametric ultrasound. Multiparametric MRI. This one is a new modality that we have, and multiparametric magnetic resonance imaging performance in detecting the IUCP grade 2 greater than prostatic carcinoma. Studies shows that multiparametric has good sensitivity for the detection and localization of the grade 2 cancers. Multiparametric MRI is less sensitive in detecting the grade less than 1 prostatic carcinomas, while T2 imaging remains the most useful method for local staging on the multiparametric MRI. At 1 Tesla hertz, multiparametric MRI has a good specificity but low sensitivity for detecting the T3 stages. Now moving on to N staging, we have the computed tomography, CT and magnetic resonance imaging. Abdominal CT and T1, T2 weighted images MRI indirectly assess the nodal invasion by using the lymph node diameter and the morphology. Now while the rest of the points are in studies or in process, which concludes that lymph nodes with a short axis greater than 8 mm in the pelvis and greater than 10 mm outside the pelvis are considered malignant. While studies regarding these are among 4,026 patients whom had positive lymph nodes, CT was positive in only 105 of the patients. One in multi-centered database of 1,091 patients that was conducted lymph node dissection, CT was sensitive and specificity was only 8.8%. And detection of microscopic lymph node invasion by CT is less than 1% in patients with IUCP grade less than 4 cancers, PSA greater than 20 nanogram per ml or localized disease. Now the second modality is the choline PET CT. In meta-analysis, these are the studies that were conducted, and it showed that in meta-analysis of 609 patients, pool sensitivity and specificity of the choline PET CT for pelvic lymph nodes were 62% and 92% respectively. While due to its low sensitivity, choline PET CT does not reach clinical acceptable diagnostic accuracy for detection of lymph nodes metastasis or to rule out the nodal dissection based on the risk of factors on nomograms. While the important point is, it is of note that choline PET CT and diffuse weighted MRI can also detect the visceral metastasis. Third important membrane antigen is the prostate specific membrane antigen based PET CT. It is 68 gadolinium or 18 sodium fluoride labeled prostate specific membrane antigen with positive emission tomography is increasing use because it provides the excellent contrast to noise ratio and thereby improving the detectability of the lesions. While the prostate specific membrane antigen is also an attractive target because of specificity for the prostatic tissues. In M staging, we have the first one is bone scan. 99 technician bone scan has been the most widely used method for evaluating the bone metastasis of the prostatic carcinoma. While bone scanning should be performed in symptomatic patients independent of the PSA level, IUCP grade or the clinical staging. Second modality in M staging is a fluoride PET and PET CT along with a choline PET and CT and MRI. 18 sodium fluoride or PET CT shows a similar specificity and superior sensitivity to bone scan And however, unlike choline PET-CT or 18 fluoride PET does not detect lymph node metastasis and is less cost effective compared to bone scan. And bone scan and 18 fluoride only assess the presence of bone metastasis. Third one is the prostate specific membrane antigen based PET and CT. There is growing evidence on the performance of 68 gadolinium PET CT in initial staging regarding the metastasis of bone. Now, what are the guidelines for imaging? In whom we should perform the imaging, that we have multiparametric and other modalities. So the recommendation is that do not use the multiparametric magnetic resonance imaging as an initial screening tool. That we have discussed earlier, that we have to follow all the three tools that we have, and then we have to move for the multiparametric or advanced technology that we have. Now, what's the controversy on screening prostate cancer? Evidence-based results of two randomized trials that was conducted in 1990 for the prostate cancer screening. The first one is the PLCO cancer screening trial, which constitutes of the prostate, lung, colorectal and the ovarian cancer. 76,000 men was included in these studies. And the important point is after 13 years of follow-up, there was no evidence of a mortality benefit for organized annual PSA screening in the PLCO trial. Second study was conducted upon the European randomized study for screening of the prostate cancer. It recruited the 182,000 men, and it constitutes that they also note that the substantial observational evidence indicates a reduction in advanced disease and reduction in prostate cancer mortality, which they attribute to the introduction of the PSA screening. So there's a controversy between the two of them, and one trial suggested that screening is ineffective, and one trial suggested that screening program does reduce the risk of prostate cancer death. Now the controversy is after 20 years of the experience with initial approach to screening began to change with the several sets of observation. It was recognized that many tumors detected via the PSA screening were small and low grade tumors, the possible extent of over-detection. And concurrent with this observation, the first reports of the outcome of the active surveillance for low risk prostate detected through PSA testing began to appear with maturation of these series. It became clear that low grade Gleason 3 and 3 and the low volume intermediate Gleason grade 3 and 4 prostate cancer will achieve high prostate cancer special survival up to the periods of 15 years. What was the drawbacks of these both of them? By studying the biopsy outcome of the European trial, it became apparent that single biomarker PSA to determine a man's risk of prostate cancer was naive. Other measures of risk had profound impact on the prostate cancer risk. So what was the potential impact of the over-detection? A man is healthy and without symptoms, and he has a PSA that leads to diagnosis of an early prostate cancer that may not cause any problem in his life. He knows he has a prostate cancer, but will now be most likely advised to embark on an active surveillance program, close monitoring for signs of progression, and not the definitive treatment. He may choose to have a definitive treatment with surgery or radiotherapy, but this will affect his urinary and sexual functions when arguably treatment was not added. Now the research societies which are against the screening are the US Preventive Task Force, and societies which are favoring the PSA screening program are the American Cancer Society, National Comprehensive Cancer Network, and the American Urological Association. I will be discussing the important point regarding them. According to the US Preventive Task Force, they recommend against the prostate cancer screening in general population. They do not have recommendation for people of certain ethnicity known for higher incidence of prostate cancer, and no recommendation for use of PSA screening for positive family history. While the rest of the three societies, number one of them is American Cancer Society, they substitute that the age 50 and above are at average risk and age 45 men at high risk, while age 40 for men are at high risk. Men screen every 2 years below PSA 2.5, while men screen annually for greater than 2.5. While according to NCCN, age 45 and 49 obtain a baseline PSA. If it is greater than 1, obtain repeat tests 1 to 2 years. and if it is less than 1, then obtain repeat tests 1 to 2 years annually. According to the American Urological Association, this panel recommends against the PSA screening in men undergo age 40 years. The panel does not recommend routine screening in men between the age 40 to 54 years, and they recommended only that the men which are age 55 and 69 recommend to screen after discussion of waiving benefits of the prostate cancer mortality 1 man for 1000 screen. Possible to screen PSA every 2 years instead of 1 year, and no screening above 70 unless 10 to 5 year life expectancy if the patient is having. Now, what are the current consensus according to the literature that we have in the BMG? For example, if a man without a previous diagnosis or a prostate cancer considering screening, if he comes to us in our clinic and if he's thinking of the PSA screening and he want to get himself checked about the prostate, so the diagnostic pathway or the flow chart that we have to follow is choice considered in this comparison. If prostate specific antigen screening or no PSA screening previously has been performed. If PSA screening has been performed, either it is elevated or it is normal. If it is normal, then no cancer diagnosis, or if still have possible to have a biopsy to be diagnosed based on the clinical. For example, if the patient is having a suspicious DRE, then we move on to further biopsies or other plans. But if the elevated PSA patient is having, we should go for biopsy or no biopsy regarding the patient's certification risk. And if we have performed the biopsy and abnormal biopsy and staging shows, then we have to localize the disease. Either it is stage 1 or advanced stage. But if the biopsy is normal, then the same criteria is follows. While if the localized disease stage 1 or stage 2 or it is advanced disease in the biopsy stage 3 or 4, then we have subsequent treatment like surgery, radiation, with or without hormonal therapy, or active surveillance of the patient should be followed. But if previously no PSA screening is performed, and if it is performed already and it is normal, then no cancer diagnosis. But if there is no PSA and patient is having a suspicious DRE, then we have to move for a biopsy because on the clinical suspicion, and then biopsy is normal, or if the biopsy is abnormal, then we follow this flow chart same.
I think what's in it for us is something of value, and that is for us, the whole scene of prostate cancer is actually evolving. Evolving in the sense that we can't expect our population to be screened because we don't have the resources. But what we have is something of, say, a division between a normal and an abnormal patient. Abnormal means where there is a query, that patient might have got cancer. So as we have been discussing earlier, we have to combine the three things that we were discussing. If the result of those three things comes out to be on the side of cancer, then we have to be again conversant with whatever things are available. For instance, if the person needs a radical prostatectomy, then we know how to do radical prostatectomy. We can't just then ask the patient to go towards radiotherapy, for instance. So you have to improve the kind of expertise that is being needed first, and then all these algorithms will be meaningful. For instance, if we don't increase our numbers of radical prostatectomies, meaning to say we don't experience a lot of cases, and then we can't expect our patients to come up with less morbid condition in post-operative phase. So first you have to increase the numbers in order to have less amount of morbidity post-operatively. If that is achieved after a substantial number of cases, then you as a community of urologists in this country will be able to follow some of the steps, otherwise not. For instance, if I diagnose a person to have radical prostatectomy and there is nobody in the city who does radical prostatectomy, and that is actually happening in Pakistan in most of the cities, then what would you do? I mean, this is the third most important cancer, at least in urology in this country, if not the first one. In America, it is the first uro-oncological disease. Here it is might be third, but still there are a lot of patients, and all these patients are actually being through something for instance, bilateral subcapsular orchiectomy, which is not needed because there is nothing which is in the pelvis, no lymph nodes, it is still organ confined. So why you want to do it? So many questions can be raised. We as a community have to develop the expertise which can give confidence to the patient, as well as we can follow then the whole algorithm. Otherwise, this algorithm will not be meaningful. We will all be discussing this problem as we have been discussing for the last 25 years. So I am discussing this kind of a disease aspect for the last 25 years without having confidence in expert opinions. This is my take on the subject.
Very true, sir. Even the largest trial that has been conducted on the prostate cancer screening, ER-SPC trial, they have mentioned in the trial that one of the reasons for anxiety in the patients that are subjected to screening is that when they come to know they are having a prostatic carcinoma, whether the clinician has got efficient expertise to deal with it. So that is 1,82,000 that patient has been screened. There are different arms of that screening. Some screening has been conducted in Swedish arm and Finnish arm, and they have also added anxiety score to the. So there was anxiety was added. Even they have reported an increase in the cardiovascular events after the patient have gone to the screening and they are being diagnosed. So this is basically a burden over the society if we are not treating it properly and we are subjecting the patient to merely screening. And coming on to the controversy that have lead to the screening is basically the indolent nature of the prostatic CA that has led. There is no clear-cut guidelines even now. So basically, in the end, we are landing upon only the patient preference and explaining to the patient whether they want to go up for the screening or not.
And just to give you another example, the Swedish model of dealing with patients and patients' anxiety. You see, they have got a very high percentage of patients who have got bladder cancer. Now, the treatment for bladder cancer in most of the cases is cystectomy. So they thought that a cystectomy should be done in many of their patients. But when the patients were asked, they were against cystectomy just because the reason that how they are going to deal with ileal conduit and a urinary bag or an appliance which has to be applied and that has to be carried on for the rest of their lives. So they were actually anxious about that aspect of their disease management. So what they did, they stopped doing cystectomies. They developed a class of therapists who are actually trained nurses, and they are known as stoma nurses. First, they prepare a clinic that is known as the Stoma Care Clinic. They prepared it, not only prepared it, but ran it for maybe 2 or 3 years. That gave confidence to the patient that whenever I pass through this stage and I have got an appliance over my abdomen, there is a clinic and there is a group of people who can deal with me efficiently and they are supportive. When they have got that kind of a confidence, then they sign their papers for cystectomy. So you see, the society has to develop like this, not, for instance, on the side of the table that we are actually sitting at, just giving and pushing something with a pen on a paper. You should go towards, for instance, radical prostatectomy. We are not thinking about anything about incontinence. We are not thinking anything about maybe fertility issues. So we have to address the end point first rather than the initial points, right? You see what I'm actually stressing on. Now we have reached a point as a community of doctors, junior, seniors, no matter. But we have reached to a point where we can discuss these problems. We don't have to push our statements. Yes, we have got nimble fingers. We can go through radical cystectomy and radical prostatectomy. But what about the afterlife? That has to be taken care of first. Otherwise, patient won't come in to you for these kind of procedures.
So now the focus of the current research is.
If you can just conclude. I
Yes, sir.
think we
The
have done.
last slide. So the bottom line on the take-home message is each individual is different once the risk of screening are explained and results are individually tailored. If this diagnosis is confirmed, then treatment is also custom planned. Guidelines are tools in recommending the plan and are not certainly rigid for each individual. Certainly, overtreatment of the prostate cancer by if aggressive cancers are caught early, then early treatment can be curative rather than the palliative. So this was the conclusion or the bottom line. Thank you.